Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're stepping into one of history's most romanticized periods, and we're going to strip away every comfortable illusion you have about it. Victorian London. You've seen the paintings, the period dramas with their corsets and carriages, the gas lamps and gentlemen in waistcoats. It looks sophisticated, doesn't it? Refined, elegant. A time when culture flourished and society had rules and structure. But here's the truth that never makes it into the BBC adaptations. Victorian London was a nightmare. A labyrinth of suffering where the vast majority of people lived in conditions so horrific, so utterly dehumanizing, that if you were transported there tomorrow, you wouldn't last a week. Not a week. You'd be dead or wishing you were within 7 days. So before we dive into the darkness, please like this video if you enjoy historical content that doesn't pull punches. Subscribe if you want more videos that reveal what life was actually like beneath the surface of history's most romanticized moments. And let me know in the comments where you're from and what time it is for you. It's always amazing to connect with people from all over the world who are curious about the real history, not the storybook version. Now let's dim the lights, close the curtains against the outside world, and prepare yourselves for a journey into the underbelly of the Victorian era. Breathe deeply. You're going to need it. Imagine you wake up on a morning in 1885. London. Your eyes open to darkness. Not the darkness of a bedroom at night, but the darkness of perpetual industrial gloom. Even though it's 9 in the morning, the sun hasn't really penetrated the thick blanket of smog that hangs over the entire city like a suffocating wool blanket, soaked in poison. This isn't fog in the romantic sense. This is what happens when you combine factory smoke, coal dust, horse manure, sewage vapor, and the exhaust from millions of people burning coal for heat and light, all trapped above a city by atmospheric conditions that meteorologists wouldn't understand for another century. The smog is so thick that gas lamps stay lit throughout the day. Not dimly lit, fully lit, because otherwise people literally cannot see more than a few feet in front of them. Carriages move slowly through the streets, their drivers leaning forward, squinting into the murk. Pedestrians move like ghosts, their shapes obscured, their features invisible, until you're nearly upon them. This fog, which Londoners call a pea souper, because of its colour and consistency, will eventually kill thousands, hundreds of thousands over the decades. Not quickly, but through the damage it does to lungs, to throats, to the delicate tissues that line the respiratory system. You cough immediately. Even before you're fully awake, you're coughing. Your throat burns. There's a metallic taste in your mouth, something between rust and chemical bitterness. Your lungs feel constricted, as though someone has wrapped iron bands around your chest. And you realize with growing horror that this is just a normal morning. This will happen tomorrow morning too, and the morning after that. For months, the entire winter will be like this, because coal smoke rises with the heat from chimneys. But London's geography and weather patterns often trap that smoke in the city rather than dispersing it. So you wake into poison every single day, and there's nothing you can do about it except endure it. Your lungs are already damaged from the moment you draw your first breath. If you're poor, which statistically you almost certainly are in Victorian London, then you don't live in some quaint cottage. You live in a tenement. A building constructed cheaply and badly, crowded with families, with rooms so small that you can touch 2 walls while standing in the center of the space. There are no windows in many rooms. If there are windows, they face into a narrow alley or courtyard where the sun never reaches. The walls are damp, perpetually damp, not just moist but actively weeping with moisture, the plaster crumbling, black mold blooming in corners like a fungal garden. The smell is indescribable. It's the smell of decades of human waste, of cooking fires in poorly ventilated spaces, of thousands of people compressed into impossible densities, of bodies that haven't had a real wash in weeks, of sickness and death and decay. The air itself seems to have texture, a heaviness that makes it difficult to breathe. Rats are your constant companions. Not occasionally, but always. You'll see them during the day if you're unfortunate. They're large, the size of small cats, bold because there are so many of them that they've lost their fear of humans. They'll run across your face while you sleep. They'll eat your food. They'll nest in your bedding. They carry diseases that you don't have names for, diseases that will kill you or cripple you if you're unlucky enough to contract them. And infection isn't the only problem. Fleas, lice, bedbugs, all of them are thriving in the filth and overcrowding. You cannot escape them. You can wash, and for a moment you'll be free of them, but the moment you return to your room they're back. There's no hot water for a proper bath. Water comes from a pump in the courtyard, and it's often contaminated. Heating enough water to bathe in requires burning coal or wood, both expensive, so most people wash in cold water from a basin, and even that's a luxury. Many people never wash their entire bodies. They might wash their faces and hands, but that's it. Their clothing goes unchanged for weeks. When they do change their clothes, they're changing into other clothes that are equally filthy. The smell of your own body becomes so normal that you stop noticing it, which is the most horrifying part. You adapt to degradation. Let's talk about what you eat. You're hungry. You're always hungry. The typical diet for a poor worker in Victorian London consists of bread, tea, and maybe some potatoes, perhaps occasionally some cheap meat from an animal that probably shouldn't have been sold for consumption. A newspaper vendor or a factory worker might eat bread and dripping for breakfast, dripping being the congealed fat left over from cooking, spread on bread, which is perhaps the most depressing food ever invented. Lunch is more bread. Dinner is a thin stew made from vegetables that are mostly rotten and whatever meat is cheapest, which is often horse meat, though this isn't always advertised. The bread itself is often adulterated. Bakers add chalk to make it white, alum to make it rise faster, and sometimes sawdust or other fillers to stretch their supply and increase their profit. Butter is rare. Cheese is rare. Fruit is rare unless it's winter apples that have been stored and are partly rotten. Your body is chronically malnourished. You're not starving in the sense of getting nothing to eat, but your diet is so lacking in nutrients that your body is slowly consuming itself. Your teeth fall out in your 30s because your diet lacks calcium and vitamin C. Your bones are weak. Your hair becomes thin and brittle. Your skin is grey and sallow. Your body simply doesn't have the resources to maintain itself properly. And this is assuming you have consistent work and can afford even this meager diet. If you're unemployed, if you're sick, if there's a downturn in the economy, then you're eating even less. You might be eating whatever you can scavenge from the streets, rotten vegetables from market stalls, scraps from butchers, food that's been partially digested and expelled by animals. Starvation is a real possibility. Many people die of starvation every winter. Others die of the diseases that malnutrition makes you vulnerable to. Your stomach hurts constantly. You have chronic diarrhea from contaminated food and water. You're never quite sure if you're going to be able to digest whatever you've eaten, or if it's going to pass through you violently. And the toilet situation, which we'll get to in a moment, makes all of this exponentially worse. Let's talk about the toilet. If you're very lucky, you share an outdoor privy with 5 or 6 other families. If you're unlucky, which is more likely, you share one with 20 or 30 people. The privy is a small wooden structure, often barely more than a hut, with a seat positioned over a deep pit. This pit fills up constantly. It overflows regularly. When it overflows, the excrement doesn't go anywhere. It pools in the ground, it seeps into the water table. It attracts rats and insects in quantities that are almost beyond comprehension. The smell is extraordinary. Vile doesn't begin to describe it. You go to the toilet at night when possible, because during the day too many people need to use it, and there are often lines. You go quickly, and you try not to think about what's underneath you. Sometimes the boards give way. People have fallen through. That's not just an unpleasant experience. It's a disease vector. Any cut, any wound, and you're introducing fecal matter directly into your bloodstream. That's sepsis. That's death, usually, unless you're lucky. The paper you use, if you use any at all, is newspaper or cloth scraps. There's no running water to wash your hands afterward. You have a basin of water shared with your housemates, and you rinse your hands in that, which just means you're distributing fecal matter to everyone in your household. Within days of arriving in Victorian London, you're infected with diseases of the digestive system. Cholera is a constant threat, so is typhoid. Dysentery is nearly universal. You develop a persistent case of diarrhea that never really goes away. You lose weight rapidly. You become dehydrated, which makes you vulnerable to every other disease. The water you drink, when it isn't contaminated with sewage, often contains lead from the pipes it travels through. Lead poisoning is endemic. It makes you stupid, violent and eventually dead. But the timeline is slow enough that people don't always make the connection. They just know that poor people seem dumber and more prone to crime. They don't understand that the water is literally poisoning their brains. But the diseases don't stop with the water and the sewage. Victorian London is a disease factory. Tuberculosis is everywhere. It's the biggest killer of the era, called consumption because it consumes you from the inside. It's spread through the air when sick people cough. In the overcrowded tenements where you live, everyone who has TB is sharing it with everyone else. You'll start coughing, at first just occasionally, then more frequently. Then you'll start coughing up blood. Your chest will hurt constantly. You'll struggle to breathe. The disease progresses slowly over months or years, and during that time you're contagious, spreading it to your family, your co-workers, everyone around you. There's no treatment. No antibiotics exist yet. Doctors recommend fresh air and rest, but you can't afford to rest. You need to work, or you'll starve. You can't get fresh air because you live in an overcrowded tenement with no windows. So you cough, and you spread the disease, and eventually you die, and someone else takes your place in the crowded bed before your body's even cold. Smallpox is another killer, though by the Victorian era vaccination has made it somewhat less common than in previous centuries. But it still appears regularly, and it's horrifying. People's faces are covered in pustules that fill with pus and leave permanent scarring. Many people are blinded by it. It kills quickly and painfully. Cholera is perhaps the most dramatic killer. It attacks without warning, causing such severe diarrhea and vomiting that people can die of dehydration within hours. In the great cholera outbreaks, entire neighborhoods are wiped out in weeks. The streets are littered with bodies. The smell of death becomes as familiar as the smell of the tenements themselves. Diphtheria kills children with alarming frequency, whooping cough. Measles, scarlet fever, typhus spread by lice, typhoid spread by contaminated water, plague, yes, bubonic plague still appears occasionally in London. Influenza, which will become the greatest killer of all in 1918 but already kills thousands every winter, to pneumonia, bronchitis, asthma made worse by the constant coal smoke, rickets from lack of sunlight and poor nutrition, scurvy from lack of vitamin C, pellagra from malnutrition, cancer which people don't understand and call various things, but which appears with grim regularity, syphilis which is rife in the poor districts and causes slow, horrible degeneration over years, gonorrhea. All of these diseases are present simultaneously, overlapping, creating a constant background hum of death. Your life expectancy is roughly half that of someone from the future. If you're an average poor Londoner, you'll be lucky to see 40. Most people die before that. Most people have lost multiple children to diseases. It's not unusual for a woman to have 10 children and see only 3 or 4 reach adulthood. You're constantly surrounded by death. It's the baseline expectation. People don't have funerals for everyone. It would bankrupt the family. So many bodies are buried in mass graves, thrown into pits with dozens or hundreds of other bodies, sometimes bones and decomposed remains of people who died years earlier. You grow up expecting to die young. It colors everything. Why would you save for retirement? Why would you plan for the future? You might not have a future. You might be coughing up blood by next month. Let's talk about work. If you're poor, you work. There's no safety net. There's no unemployment insurance. No welfare, no government assistance beyond the workhouse. And the workhouse is literally the worst option available. So you work, and your job is probably horrifying. If you're a man, you might work in a factory. The hours are long from dawn to dusk, often longer, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. The pay is minimal. The conditions are dangerous. Machinery doesn't have guards. There's no safety equipment. People lose fingers, hands, entire limbs regularly. There's no compensation if this happens. You're just fired. You're expected to work through pain, through illness, through injury, because there are always more desperate people willing to take your job if you complain. The air in factories is toxic. Textile mills have air so filled with fiber and dust that workers are constantly coughing. Ironworks are furnaces of heat. Chemical factories expose you to fumes that burn your lungs. Your body breaks down quickly. Occupational diseases are endemic. Workers in certain industries are known to die young. Everyone knows this. No one does anything about it. If you're a woman, your options are more limited. You might work as a domestic servant, which means you live in your employer's house, working from early morning to late night. doing literally everything: cooking, cleaning, laundry, childcare. You're paid almost nothing. You're often abused, sexually or physically or verbally, or all three. You have no autonomy. You can be fired at any moment. You might work in a factory if you're younger. Factory work for women often involves smaller, more delicate work, assembling small components, picking through materials, doing detailed sewing. The pay is even worse than men's pay, sometimes a quarter of what men earn for similar work. You might work as a seamstress, which means sitting hunched over fabric for 14 hours a day, your eyesight slowly deteriorating, developing chronic back pain and hand cramps that never fully go away. Your fingers bleed from the constant punctures of the needle. If you're very unfortunate, you might end up in sex work, which is both common and incredibly dangerous. You might work as a match girl, dipping wooden splints into phosphorus to make matches. This causes phosphorus poisoning, leading to a horrifying condition called phossy jaw, where the bone in your face rots away. You can literally watch your own face decompose while you're still alive. If you're a child, you work too. Children as young as 5 or 6 are working, sometimes in factories, sometimes in mines. Mining is particularly horrific. Children are small, so they're sent into the deepest, narrowest shafts where adults can't fit. They push carts of coal that weigh more than they do. They're often worked until they collapse. Many don't make it past childhood. Lung disease is nearly universal among child miners. Accidents are constant. The darkness, the danger, the physical demands, all of it leaves lasting damage. The few who survive to adulthood have permanently ruined bodies. And throughout all of this work, all of these brutal hours and terrible conditions, the pay is barely enough to survive. You're perpetually on the edge of destitution. A single injury, a single period of unemployment, and you're in the workhouse or on the streets. The workhouse deserves its own discussion because it represents perhaps the cruelest aspect of Victorian society. The workhouse is supposedly a place of charity, where the destitute can go to receive shelter and food. In reality, it's a prison designed to make poverty so unbearable that people will accept any kind of work rather than enter it. Workhouses are deliberately made unpleasant. The food is worse than what poor people eat at home, which is saying something. It's a thin gruel, usually made by boiling scraps of meat and gristle with barely any flavor. The portions are small. You're always hungry in the workhouse. The work is designed to be pointless and exhausting. You might be set to break rocks with hammers, hour after hour, for no purpose except to break them. You might be set to picking apart ropes, strand by strand, until your fingers bleed. You might be set to walking in circles on a treadmill that serves no function except to exhaust you. The conditions are overcrowded and unsanitary. Disease spreads rapidly. Many people die in the workhouse from diseases they contract there. Families are separated when they enter. Husbands and wives are kept apart. Children are separated from parents. You might see your child once a week for a few minutes under supervision. Emotional bonds are deliberately severed. The theory is that this will make people work harder to avoid returning. In practice, it makes people desperate and broken. There are scandals regularly about abuse in workhouses, adults beating children, sexual abuse, starvation, beatings. People are killed in workhouses, but there's little investigation and rarely any consequences because workhouse staff are protected. Being poor is essentially treated as a crime, and the workhouse is the punishment. It's a place you'd go only if you had absolutely no other option, and many people choose homelessness instead. And homelessness in Victorian London is itself a death sentence. If you end up on the streets, you're done. Homelessness is not a situation you survive long term. You might last weeks, maybe a few months if you're lucky, and the weather's mild, but the odds of you making it to next year are very poor. The night shelters that exist are barely better than sleeping in the street. They're overcrowded, filthy, and often require you to do work the next morning to pay for your bed. Some require you to be a certain level of religious. Some segregate by gender in ways that separate parents from children. Many close during the day, pushing you onto the streets where you have nowhere to go. The British winters are cold, but not brutally so by modern standards. But when you have no shelter, no warm clothes and no food, they're deadly. You'll develop frostbite. Your toes turn black and gangrenous, and if you're lucky enough to get them amputated, you at least won't die of the infection, but you're now permanently disabled. If you're unlucky, the gangrene spreads and you die of blood poisoning. Many homeless people are found dead on streets in winter, their bodies stiff and cold, having frozen to death sitting against a wall. The police don't really help homeless people. They arrest them regularly, moving them on from neighborhoods where they might be seen or imprisoning them for the crime of being poor. Prison conditions are barely better than the street. You're packed into cells with dozens of other people. Diseases spread rapidly. The sanitation is terrible. You're fed minimally. You're forced to do hard labor. Many people die in prison from disease or abuse, and unlike other jobs where you at least earn something, prison is unpaid. You're just broken down further. When you're released, you're marked as a criminal, which makes it even harder to find work. Most people who've been imprisoned end up back on the streets or in crime. The cycle feeds itself. Let's talk about crime, because in Victorian London, crime is both pervasive and a natural response to poverty. If you're poor and hungry, and you see food that you can't afford, what do? Many people steal. Theft is everywhere. Pickpockets work the streets and crowded markets. Burglars target homes, especially the homes of the wealthy. Organized gangs control certain neighborhoods. The police, such as they are, can't control it. There's no fingerprinting yet, no scientific forensics, very little actual investigation. Crimes are often solved through luck or informants paid for information. Many crimes aren't solved at all, but when you are caught stealing, the consequences are severe. For minor theft, you can be sentenced to prison or transportation. Transportation means being sent to Australia, which is literally the other side of the world. You're chained aboard a ship for months. Many people die on the voyage. Those who survive arrive in Australia, where you're essentially enslaved, forced to work on convict labor gangs in terrible conditions. If you survive your sentence, you're released in a place where you know no one and have nothing. If you return to England before your transportation sentence is completed, you can be executed. Serious crimes, especially violent crimes, result in execution. The death penalty is used liberally. Public executions are common and are actually a form of entertainment. Crowds gather to watch people hang. It's a spectacle, and the crimes that result in execution aren't always that serious by modern standards. In the early Victorian era, you could be hanged for theft. Gradually the system became slightly less brutal, but violent crime, murder, and crimes against the person still result in hanging. Prisons have gallows. Executions are public, though by the 1890s they've moved inside the prisons rather than being held in the street. But they're still attended by crowds. The last words of the condemned are sometimes printed in newspapers. It's macabre, and the system is brutal and arbitrary. The poor are executed far more often than the wealthy. The wealthy, if they commit crimes, are often able to hire lawyers who can defend them. The poor have no defense. They're convicted based on testimony, often from biased witnesses, often from police who beat confessions out of them. The judicial system is stacked completely in favor of the wealthy. This is obvious to everyone, but it's accepted as normal. That's just how it is. The poor deserve less, and if they commit crimes, they deserve to die. That's the attitude. Let's talk about violence, because it's another constant in Victorian life. Violence is everywhere. Violence in homes between spouses, especially toward women. Domestic abuse is so common that it's not even really considered a crime. If your husband beats you, you have almost no legal recourse. He's your owner, essentially. You have no rights of property, no ability to divorce, except in the most extreme circumstances, and only if you're wealthy enough to afford it. So women endure abuse. They're beaten regularly. They're raped within marriage, which isn't recognized as rape because you're married. They're controlled completely. They can't work without their husband's permission. They can't own property without their husband. They're essentially in a permanent state of servitude. Many women are killed by their husbands, and no one prosecutes because it's treated as a domestic matter. Violence between people in the streets is also common. Neighborhoods are territorial. Gangs fight over territory. Young men with nothing to do and no outlets for their aggression form gangs and fight other gangs. The police are overwhelmed and often violent themselves. Police brutality is standard. If you're poor and you have an encounter with police, you're likely to be beaten. This is accepted. The police are working-class people themselves, often recruited from the same populations they police, and they're brutal because that's the only language understood in these neighborhoods. Violence against children is also normalized. Children are beaten regularly as punishment. This is considered necessary for their development. That's the attitude. Spare the rod and spoil the child. So children are hit, often severely, for minor infractions. Many children are seriously injured or killed by parental violence, but again it's treated as a family matter. Violence is woven through every level of society, and most of it goes unpunished because the victims are poor and have no power. Now let's talk about your housing in more detail, because there's a lot more to say about it. Your tenement room, which you might share with 5 or 10 people, is not just small and filthy, it's actively dangerous. The building itself is deteriorating, the wood is rotting, the plaster is crumbling, the bricks are cracked, the structure is unstable, fires are a constant terror. These buildings are packed tightly together, made primarily of wood, and heated by open fires and coal stoves. Fires spread rapidly through entire neighborhoods. When fires happen, people die. Buildings collapse on people trying to flee. People jump from windows and are killed. There's no fire department that can respond in time. The fire brigade exists, but is underfunded and can't reach all fires. Many neighborhoods burn regularly. You probably know someone who's died in a fire. If you're lucky, your room has a small fireplace for heating. If you're unlucky, you share a stove with multiple families, or you have no heat at all, and you spend winter trying to stay warm with nothing but your own body, heat and whatever covers you can pile on yourself. The winters are miserable. You don't ever truly warm up. Your hands go numb. You can barely feel your fingers. Your feet are in constant pain. Water freezes in basins. You wear everything you own to stay warm. Babies die of cold. Old people die of cold. People develop pneumonia from the cold and die. The cold is a killer, especially combined with malnutrition and disease. Summer is worse in a different way. The tenements become ovens. The heat is unbearable. The smell intensifies. Disease spreads faster because everything is warm. Flies swarm. There's no air circulation. The darkness and dampness of winter are replaced by the oppressive heat of summer, and the misery just continues in a different form. Your room has no storage. You have very few possessions. Maybe a bed, maybe a chair, maybe a small table. That's it. Everything else exists in the communal spaces that you share with dozens of other people. Your privacy is non-existent. People walk through your room because it's the route to somewhere else. Your intimate moments are witnessed. Your sickness is witnessed. Your poverty is witnessed by everyone. There's no hiding anything. The shame of poverty is compounded by the fact that everyone sees it. Let's talk about hygiene beyond just the lack of washing. Your teeth are likely rotting or already gone. Dental care doesn't really exist for poor people. Dentists exist for the wealthy, but for the poor, the only option when a tooth becomes painful is extraction. Extractions are done without anesthetic or with chloroform, which itself is dangerous and sometimes kills people. Once you lose enough teeth, you can't chew properly, so you can't eat harder foods, which limits your diet further to soft foods like gruel and bread. Your gums become infected frequently. Tooth infections are agonizing and can lead to blood poisoning that kills you. Most people in Victorian London are missing multiple teeth by middle age. Many are completely toothless by 40. Your skin is covered with sores from various infections. Boils are common, sometimes infected with bacteria that cause festering wounds. Scabies is endemic. It's mites that burrow under your skin and cause intense itching and infection. Once you have scabies, you spread it to everyone you live with and everyone you work with. It's nearly impossible to get rid of without proper treatment, and poor people don't have access to treatment. So scabies spreads through entire neighborhoods, affecting thousands of people simultaneously. Your hair is infested with lice. You might try to remove them by combing, but this is largely ineffective. Many people end up shaving their heads to control lice, which in winter means your head is perpetually cold and exposed. Your body itches constantly from various infestations. Scratching makes it worse, creating open wounds that get infected. Infections become more serious. Your body is a landscape of pain and infection. This is just normal. Everyone lives like this. You accept it because the alternative is worse. Let's talk about how you spend your time, because it's not pleasant either. You work most of the day, in your limited free time. What do? If you're lucky enough to have a few shillings and you're an adult, you might go to a pub. The pub is where working class people gather. It's warm at least, and you can get a drink. But alcohol in Victorian London is dangerous because it's often adulterated or poisoned. People go blind from cheap alcohol. People die from it, but they drink anyway because it numbs them to their situation. Alcoholism is rife. Many working class people are heavy drinkers because it's one of the only escapes available. The problem with this is that drinking costs money you don't have, which means you're not eating properly, and alcohol damages your liver and brain over time, making you sick and eventually killing you. If you're younger, you might have some form of entertainment that's free. You might gather with other people in the streets, socializing. You might watch street performers, acrobats, musicians, magicians. You might attend public hangings if one is scheduled. You might go to a penny gaff, which is a cheap entertainment venue, where you might watch a bad play or a musical performance. If you're religious, you might go to church, which is free entertainment, and also provides some sense of community. But many poor people are not religious, because the church is associated with the wealthy and the authorities, and church attendance requires clothes that are at least somewhat presentable, which you might not have. If you're a child and you're not working, you're probably on the streets. You're running around unsupervised, which means you're exposed to all the dangers: traffic, disease, violence, sexual predators. Street children are treated as problems. The police will arrest them for being street children. The solution that society comes up with is to send them to industrial schools, which are barely better than workhouses. So childhood is brief and dangerous. Let's talk about the social structure, because it's important to understand that you don't have any agency in Victorian society. Your birth determines your entire life. If you're born poor, you'll die poor. If you're born working class, you might rise a bit into skilled trades, but you're unlikely to escape your class entirely. The class system is rigid and enforced. There's the aristocracy at the top, who own vast lands and have generational wealth. Below them is the upper middle class, wealthy merchants and professionals. Then the middle class, shopkeepers and clerks and small business owners. Then the working class, skilled trades and factory workers. Then the poor, the unskilled labourers and those who can't find work. And below that, the criminals and the beggars and the homeless. You can't move between these classes easily. There are rare exceptions of people who rise, usually by being exceptionally lucky or shrewd, but the system is designed to keep you where you are. If you're born poor, the assumption is that you're poor because you're inherently inferior. You're thought to be dumber, morally weaker, less virtuous, less deserving of resources. This is the universal attitude. It's not just the rich who think this. Poor people think this about themselves. They've internalized the idea that they deserve their poverty, that if they were just better or worked harder or had more virtue, they'd be wealthy. This makes it easier for the wealthy to justify their lack of charity. If poverty is your own fault, then you don't deserve help. The government should not provide assistance because it would create dependency and reward laziness. This is a common attitude. So there's no safety net. If you become unable to work, you're done, you'll starve or you'll go to the workhouse. There's no unemployment insurance, no sick leave, no pension when you become old. If you're injured at work, your employer is not responsible. You're just out of work and out of luck. Many older people who are no longer able to work become homeless or go to the workhouse. These are your only options in old age, if you haven't somehow saved enough money to support yourself, which most people haven't because they're living hand to mouth. Let's talk about women specifically, because their situation is particularly dire. If you're a woman in Victorian London, you have almost no legal rights. You're considered to be the property of your father until you marry, at which point you become the property of your husband. You can't sign contracts without your husband's permission. You can't own property. You can't control any money you might earn. It legally belongs to your husband. You can't divorce except under extreme circumstances, and only if you're wealthy enough to afford an expensive legal proceeding. If your husband dies, you have limited rights to his property. It typically goes to his eldest son. You're expected to be obedient and submissive. You're expected to be a mother and a wife. That's your role. Any ambitions beyond that are considered unfeminine and shameful. If you want to work, your options are extremely limited. You can be a servant, a seamstress, a factory worker, a governess, or a teacher, if you can get educated, but you'll be paid less than men for equivalent work. If you want to do anything else, you're looked upon with suspicion. The idea of women in professional roles is shocking to most people. Women are thought to be inherently less capable. Even if you're as intelligent as a man, you're assumed to be less capable. This is backed up by law and custom. Universities don't admit women. The professions are closed to women. Government positions are closed to women. You can't vote. You're completely excluded from power and decision-making. If you become pregnant outside of marriage, you're ruined. Your reputation is destroyed. You can't find respectable work. You're often forced into sex work just to survive. Your illegitimate child is a source of shame and may be taken away from you. The father faces no consequences. This is considered your fault for being immoral. Abortion is illegal and dangerous. Women die regularly from unsafe abortions, and pregnancy itself is dangerous. Childbirth is one of the leading causes of death for women. You might die in childbirth. It's a real and terrifying possibility. Many women do die, and if you survive, the damage to your body can be permanent. Infections can leave you unable to have more children, but in constant pain. Injuries can leave you incontinent. Childbirth doesn't just risk death, it risks permanent disability, and you might be pregnant almost constantly. If you're married and your husband wants children, because there's no reliable birth control, you might have 15 pregnancies in 20 years. Many of your children will die. Many of your pregnancies will end in miscarriage from the strain on your body. And while you're dealing with all of this, you're also expected to work, to keep the household, to care for your children, and possibly your parents-in-law or other family members. Your life is unpaid labor, constant, exhausting, and with no recognition. And sexual assault is rampant. Women are assaulted regularly, and there's very little recourse. If you report an assault, you're blamed. People ask what you were doing out alone at night, what you were wearing, whether you encouraged the man somehow. Even if the man is convicted, the sentences are light, and most assaults aren't even reported, because women know that they'll be blamed and shamed. So assault happens constantly, with impunity. If you're a servant and your employer assaults you, you have no recourse. You can't go to the police and expect to be taken seriously. You're a servant, you have no status. Your employer is an important person. If you report it, you'll be fired, and you'll never find work again because word spreads that you're a troublemaker. So you endure assault. You might become pregnant as a result. Then you're fired anyway for being pregnant. Your options are limited. Many women in this situation end up in sex work, which puts you at even greater risk of violence. Sex workers are often killed. Their murders go unsolved because they're not important enough to investigate. Women in Victorian London live in terror of sexual violence, and society offers them no protection. Let's talk about clothes, because your appearance is important in Victorian society. But it's also torturous. If you're poor, you have very few clothes. You might have 1 or 2 dresses or suits that you wear constantly. Clothes are expensive, and you can't afford to buy new ones often. Your clothes are patched repeatedly. They're worn through in places, but you keep wearing them because they're all you have. Washing clothes requires water, fuel to heat the water, time and labor. Most poor people wash their clothes rarely, maybe once a month or once every few months. This means you're wearing the same filthy clothes constantly. For women, fashion dictates that you wear a corset, which is a torture device designed to make your waist as small as possible. A Victorian corset is made of whalebone and laces, so tight that it restricts your breathing. Women are expected to have a wasp waist, the smaller the better. This is achieved by wearing corsets from childhood. Your ribs are actually compressed by the corset. Your organs are displaced. Your ability to breathe is restricted. Many women experience fainting spells from oxygen deprivation. Damage to your body is permanent. Your ribs and organs don't go back to their normal shape after years of compression. Women are also expected to wear long skirts that drag on the ground, collecting filth and disease. These skirts are so heavy that they restrict movement. Walking is laborious. Working is more difficult. And if you're poor and you're wearing a corset and long skirts, you're suffering in ways that the wealthy only suffer slightly more comfortably. For men, clothes are somewhat easier, but you're still expected to wear layers, including a waistcoat and jacket, even though most workplaces are hot. In factories, workers are wearing heavy clothes in environments that are furnaces. People collapse from heat stroke, But that's just what you wear, for both men and women. Footwear is often inadequate. Shoes are expensive, and you repair them constantly. Many poor people go without shoes, which is extremely painful because the streets are filthy and there's broken glass and sharp objects everywhere. If you don't have shoes, your feet are constantly cut and infected. Infections lead to blood poisoning. People have died from infected wounds on their feet because they couldn't afford shoes. So clothing, which is supposed to protect you, actually damages you further. Let's talk about education. Because if you're poor, you probably don't get any. Schools exist, but you can't afford to attend. Your parents need you to work from an early age, so you never learn to read or write. Literacy is limited. Many adults are completely illiterate. This makes you vulnerable to exploitation, because you can't read contracts, you can't read warnings, you can't access information. The world is closed off to you. By the 1870s, education becomes compulsory for children in England, but this is weakly enforced. Many children still don't attend because their parents need them to work. The schools that exist are often terrible. Teachers are underpaid and often harsh. Students are beaten regularly for minor infractions. Education is not meant to enlighten you. It's meant to teach you obedience and basic skills for factory work. You learn to read and write just enough to follow simple instructions, to do basic arithmetic. That's it. Critical thinking is not encouraged. Questioning authority is punished. The education system is designed to produce compliant workers, not engaged citizens. Students who show any sign of independence or questioning are beaten into submission. This happens in schools. Teachers are permitted to beat students, and they do. Many children are seriously injured by teachers. Some have permanent damage from beatings. This is considered normal and acceptable. So school, if you attend at all, is traumatic. You learn to fear authority, to not question, to submit. Then you enter the workforce and you've already been trained to be obedient and docile. Let's talk about mental health. Because Victorian London is a place of such misery and hopelessness, that the psychological toll is devastating. Depression is endemic. Suicide is common. The suicide rate is high and rising. People kill themselves by various means: poison, jumping from buildings, drowning, cutting their wrists. Many suicides are not reported as such because of the stigma. They're listed as accidents. People also go insane from the conditions. Stress, malnutrition, constant sickness. All of it takes a toll. Mental illness appears in high rates in poor populations. The asylum system, which is supposed to help, is actually terrifying. Asylums are brutal places where people are often mistreated. Patient restraint is common. Nausti and tiserisos and souls, tiserisos and spiritual alive. People are locked away and abused. Some asylums do treatment that's designed to hurt people, based on the idea that pain or shock will cure them of mental illness. Treatments include ice water baths, induced seizures, and various other tortures. Many people go into asylums and never come out. If they do come out, they're traumatized and often more damaged than when they went in. The stigma of being labeled insane is permanent. If you've been in an asylum, you're marked. People know about it. You can't get a job. Your marriage prospects are destroyed. So many people with mental illness hide it and suffer in silence. They drink to cope. They use whatever drugs they can find. They become violent. They hurt themselves. The psychological weight of Victorian existence is crushing. People are trapped in situations they can't escape from. They see no future. They're in constant pain. They're starving. They're diseased. The wonder is not that some people become suicidal or insane. The wonder is that more people don't. Let's talk about crime as a victim. If something is stolen from you, you have limited recourse. If you're poor, reporting a theft to police might result in you being blamed for leaving your possessions vulnerable. Police don't care much about theft from poor people. The assumption is that poor people deserve to be robbed because they're probably criminals anyway. If you're mugged, if you're assaulted, if someone breaks into your home, you might report it, but you might not be believed or helped. Police respond differently, based on where you live. Wealthy neighborhoods get more police protection. Poor neighborhoods are neglected except when police want to make arrests. If you witness a crime or are a victim of a crime, testifying in court is an ordeal. You have to miss work, which means losing pay you can't afford to lose. The legal process is confusing. and you might not have a lawyer because you can't afford one. Your testimony might not be believed because you're poor, and poor people are thought to be dishonest. Even if the perpetrator is convicted, the sentence might be light, and if the person convicted has money and connections, they might appeal successfully or get a reduced sentence. The justice system is not just, it's weighted toward the wealthy and against the poor, so you're victims with no recourse. Let's talk about air pollution more extensively, because it's such a pervasive killer that it deserves more attention. London in the winter is covered in smog. This isn't fog, it's industrial smoke trapped in the atmosphere. Thousands of factories burn coal, millions of homes burn coal for heat. The smoke from all of this fills the air. When weather conditions prevent dispersal, the smog becomes so thick that visibility is reduced to a few feet. People get lost in the smog. They walk in front of carriages and get hit. They fall into rivers. They wander into dangerous areas and get lost. The smog is so thick that even in the middle of the day, it's dark. Gas lights stay lit constantly. The smog is toxic. It irritates your eyes, nose, and throat. It damages your lungs with every breath. People with asthma suffer terribly. Elderly people and very young children die from respiratory failure during heavy smog. Chronic bronchitis and emphysema are endemic. Most people in London develop chronic respiratory problems from the pollution. You cough constantly. You're short of breath. Your chest hurts. Doctors don't really understand what's causing it, but they know it's related to living in London. The solution they offer is to move to the countryside if possible, but that's not an option for poor people who are tied to their jobs in the city. So you stay and you breathe poison and you slowly die from it. Some smog events are particularly bad. In the later 19th century, there are several killer smogs where the pollution becomes so thick and toxic that thousands of people die. Hospitals overflow with people having respiratory failure. Schools close. Factories close. The city essentially shuts down because people can't see to move around. But then conditions improve slightly, and everything returns to normal, even though the underlying problem persists. And no one does anything substantial about it, because controlling pollution would require limiting industrial production, which would reduce profit, and that's not acceptable. So the pollution continues and people continue to die from it. By the 20th century, this becomes an even bigger problem, leading to regulations, but in Victorian times it's just accepted as the cost of living in the city. Let's talk about your relationship with time and the future. In Victorian London, the present is so difficult that thinking about the future is almost impossible. You're focused on survival. Where will your next meal come from? Will you still have your job tomorrow? Will you get sick? Will you fall and be injured? These are the questions that occupy your mind constantly. Planning for the future is a luxury. Most people can't afford to save money. Every penny goes to immediate survival. The concept of long-term planning is foreign. You might work for 40 years and have nothing to show for it at the end. You might retire and immediately become destitute because you have no pension and no savings. You might become disabled and lose your job and end up in the workhouse. This is realistic. This is what happens to many people. So why plan? Why sacrifice now for a future that's uncertain and might not happen? This leads to many poor people engaging in behaviors that seem self-destructive from the perspective of the wealthy: excessive drinking, gambling, not working as hard as they could. But from the perspective of the poor person living in the moment, these are rational responses to an impossible situation. You're suffering constantly. Why not have a moment of escape through drinking? You're going to be poor whether you work hard or not. Why not try to gamble your way out of poverty with a small bet? There's no future for you, so why plan for one? This mindset is used against poor people. The wealthy point to these behaviors as evidence that poor people are morally inferior and deserve their poverty. But the behaviors are responses to the system that traps them. Let's talk about belief systems, because religion plays a major role in Victorian life. Many poor people are deeply religious, but religion doesn't actually help them. The church teaches that earthly suffering is okay because it's preparation for heaven. The poor should accept their suffering patiently and obediently. Complaining is sin. Stealing to feed your children is sin. Rebellion is sin. The church essentially tells poor people to accept their exploitation, and many poor people do. They turn to religion as their only source of hope. They pray for deliverance that never comes. They accept abuse and suffering as God's will. This is extremely damaging psychologically, but it's also comforting in a way. It gives meaning to suffering. It provides community through church attendance. It offers the hope of eternal reward, even though there's no reward in this life. For those who aren't religious, the situation is bleaker. There's no framework for meaning. Life is just suffering and survival. Some people turn to revolutionary ideologies instead. Ideas about socialism and communism, about overthrowing the system that oppresses them. But these ideas are dangerous. Advocating revolution is illegal. You can be arrested for sedition. So revolutionary thought has to be hidden. It's discussed secretly among trusted people, but it exists. There's a growing awareness that the system is unjust. There are movements for change. They're small and they're often brutally suppressed. But they exist. By the end of the Victorian era, working class movements and trade unions are becoming more organized. Strikes are happening. Demands for reform are being made. But during most of the Victorian era, change happens slowly. The system is too entrenched. Most poor people are just trying to survive. They don't have time to be revolutionaries. Those who do get involved in political movements risk everything. They can be arrested. They can lose their jobs. They can be transported. So most people focus on survival and whatever comfort they can find in religion or escape. Let's talk about death itself, because it's so pervasive that it deserves attention. Death surrounds you constantly. You've probably seen dead bodies. You've probably seen someone die. Children might die in your home. If you get sick, you might be visited by someone from church preparing you for death. Death is expected. It happens regularly and to people of all ages. Babies die constantly from infections and disease. Children die from common illnesses. Young people die from accidents or violence or disease. Old people die from age and accumulated damage from a lifetime of hard work. There's no avoiding it. It's part of the landscape of Victorian life. Funerals are expensive, which creates a problem for poor families. If you want a proper funeral for someone, it costs money. Many poor families have to go into debt or sell possessions to pay for a funeral. Those who can't afford it have to bury their dead in mass graves or have the body taken for medical dissection. The idea of your loved one's body being cut up by medical students is horrifying, but it's the only option if you can't pay for a funeral. Burial grounds are overcrowded. Bodies are piled on top of each other. Sometimes graves are dug through bones from previous burials. Decomposition causes a horrible smell. Miasma theory, which is the dominant understanding of disease transmission, attributes disease to bad air rising from cemeteries. So burial grounds themselves are thought to be dangerous, but there's nowhere else to bury people. The systems are overwhelmed, so people are buried in conditions that would be considered sacrilegious and horrifying if there were alternatives. But there aren't. This is what you get. And the grieving process is complicated by the fact that death is so common that there's not a lot of sympathy. You're expected to mourn, but not for long. You need to get back to work. If you've lost a spouse who was working, you're suddenly without income. You need to find a way to survive immediately. You might be homeless within days. There's no time for grief. Let's talk about the few moments of beauty or joy that might exist. Because Victorian London isn't entirely bleak. There are moments. If you're lucky enough to be invited to watch a street performer, there's entertainment. Music exists. There's folk music that exists in working class communities. Let's talk about the few moments of beauty or joy that might exist. There are bands that people attend to watch. There's street theatre and acrobatics. These are free or very cheap. There's also the beauty of nature, though it's pollution-covered nature. There are parks in London, though poor people might not have easy access to them. Wealthy people have parks in their neighbourhoods. Poor people have crowded streets and alleys. But there might be a park somewhere that you can reach occasionally. Walking through a park, seeing green growing things, might be a respite from the grey urban environment. There are also human connections, friendships with people in your situation, community bonds, helping each other survive. These relationships are valuable, even though everyone is struggling. There's humour too, dark humour, gallows humour, but humour nonetheless. Poor people joke about their situation. They find funny in the misery. They make each other laugh. There's also sex, which is one of the few pleasures available. Sex is free. It's a form of physical pleasure in a life of pain. There's also drink, though as mentioned, this is problematic. But in the moment, a drink is a pleasure. A few hours in a pub with friends, away from the crowded tenement, is a respite. There are also celebrations and festivals. Christmas, even for the poor, might involve some small celebration. Easter, local festivals. These provide brief moments of joy. Food might be slightly better. There might be music and celebration. These moments are brief, but they exist. They might be what keep people going. The knowledge that even though most of life is suffering, there are small moments of respite, small moments of connection and happiness. These don't make life good, but they make it survivable. Let's talk about the state of medical care, because it's relevant to survival in Victorian London. If you're sick and you're poor, your options are limited. Doctors exist, but they're expensive. You can't afford to see a doctor. If you do become very sick, you might be admitted to a hospital, which is free but which is its own kind of horror. Hospitals in Victorian London are places where disease spreads. They're overcrowded. Hygiene is poor. Infections are rampant. Doctors don't yet understand germ theory, so they don't sterilize instruments or wash their hands. They move from one patient to another, spreading infection. Many people go into hospitals and get sicker while they're there. Survival rates are not good. Amputation is common as treatment for infections. If you have an infected limb, the treatment is to cut it off. This prevents the infection from spreading to the rest of your body, but it leaves you disabled. There's pain relief available, but it's limited. Chloroform and ether exist as anesthetics, but they're expensive and not always available. Many people are operated on without anesthesia. Surgery is agonizing, and if you survive the surgery, infection is still likely. Many people die from post-operative infections. Medications are limited and often ineffective. Doctors prescribe things like mercury for syphilis, which poisons you while killing the bacteria. They don't really understand how most things work. Medicine is more art than science. Many remedies are ineffective or actively harmful. Bloodletting is still done in some places based on the theory of balancing humours, which doesn't work at all. Leeches are applied. Poisonous substances are ingested. Many folk remedies are worthless or dangerous. If you're sick and you're poor, you either recover on your own or you die. Medical care doesn't really help most of the time. And if you do recover, you're often left with permanent damage, scarring from boils, deformity from rickets or other nutritional diseases, chronic pain from poorly healed injuries. These disabilities follow you and limit your ability to work for the rest of your life. Let's talk about time and how it moves differently for poor people. When you're constantly hungry and in pain and sick and tired, time moves slowly. A day is an eternity of suffering. An hour is long. A year feels like a decade. Your body is aging rapidly from the stress and poor conditions. You're 25, but you look 40. Your body is breaking down. Your hair is graying. Your joints are already showing arthritis. You've lost teeth. The sun damage and dirt have aged your skin. You're deteriorating rapidly, and there's no relief in sight. This is your life for however long you live. Unless something changes, unless you somehow get lucky, this is it. Work and suffering and hope for death. That's your life. And the psychological impact of this is profound. Many people become numb. They go through the motions. They don't feel much of anything anymore. Depression is widespread but not recognized as such. It's just accepted that life is miserable. Some people become hard. They lose empathy. They're willing to hurt others to benefit themselves because compassion is a luxury they can't afford. Some people become religious and accept their suffering. Some people become alcoholic. Some people become violent. The system breaks people in various ways, but it breaks almost everyone. The few who maintain their humanity and hope do so despite everything, which is remarkable but also tragic. Let's talk about violence against poor people by authorities. Police are not your friends. Police are working-class people employed to control other working-class people. They're brutal. If you're poor and you encounter police, you're likely to be beaten. This is standard. If you're loitering, if you're homeless, if you're panhandling, if you're in the wrong neighborhood, police will arrest you and beat you in the process. The beatings are often severe, broken bones, internal bleeding, permanent injuries, and there's no accountability. Police protect each other. If a police officer beats you, no one will testify against them. Other officers will claim it didn't happen or that you were being aggressive, and they had to use force. The word of a police officer is taken over the word of a poor person, so you're beaten with impunity. This creates a climate of fear. Poor people fear police. They avoid interactions if possible, but sometimes interactions are unavoidable, and those interactions are dangerous. Military and National Guard are also present in London, particularly during labour unrest. Strikes have been violently suppressed. Soldiers have fired on crowds of striking workers. People have been killed. This is considered justified because the strikes are considered threatening to order. So violence against poor people is not just tolerated, it's actually encouraged by authorities when it's directed toward maintaining order and suppressing dissent. This creates a highly militarized environment where poor people are essentially an enemy to be controlled. Let's talk about the environment itself. Beyond the smog, Victorian London is surrounded by pollution. Rivers are filthy. The Thames is an open sewer. Sewage flows into it constantly. Dead animals, human waste, industrial waste, all of it ends up in the Thames. The smell is horrendous. The river is unusable. Swimming in it is dangerous because of disease. Fishing in it is dangerous for the same reason. And yet the city depends on the river for water. Water is drawn from the Thames downstream of the sewage outfall, which means people are literally drinking sewage. This causes cholera and typhoid epidemically. The soil is contaminated. Groundwater is contaminated. Nothing is clean. Food grown near the city is grown in contaminated soil. Even if you're eating vegetables, they're contaminated with pathogens. Everything is contaminated. Noise pollution is also a problem. The city is incredibly loud. Factory machinery, traffic, people shouting, all of it creates a constant noise. If you live near a factory, the noise is unbearable, especially when trying to sleep. The noise itself causes stress and prevents proper rest. Sleep deprivation is common, which further damages your health. You're constantly stressed by the noise and unable to rest properly. Light pollution also exists in limited form. Gas lamps create light at night, but it's spotty. Some areas are lit, others are dark. The darkness creates danger. Crime happens in the dark. Accidents happen. But the light that does exist prevents true sleep. Melatonin production is disrupted. Your circadian rhythm is disrupted. Sleep quality is poor even when you have time to sleep. So the environment itself is actively damaging you in multiple ways. Let's talk about what would happen to you specifically if you were transported to Victorian London today. You would arrive confused. The smell would hit you first. It would be overwhelming. You'd probably vomit. The physical sensation of overwhelming smell would be disorienting. Then the sound. The noise of the city without modern sound dampening would be loud and chaotic. Then the cold or heat, depending on the season. Your body would be in shock from sensory overload. You'd need to find shelter quickly because you wouldn't survive a night on the streets. If you were particularly lucky, you might find work immediately, but you'd be working in conditions you've never experienced. You'd be exhausted after the first day. Your body would ache in ways you've never experienced. By the second day, you'd be seeing signs of hunger that you've never felt. By the third day, you'd be desperation setting in. Your hygiene situation would be deteriorating rapidly. You'd be dirtier than you've ever been. Your body would itch from lice and fleas. The smell coming from your own body would be noticeable to you. By the fourth day, you'd probably be sick from contaminated food and water. Your stomach would be cramping. You'd be running to the outhouse constantly. By the fifth day, you'd be weak and feverish. By the sixth day, you'd probably be bedridden with a serious illness. By the seventh day, depending on what illness you've contracted, you might be dead or wishing you were. This is not exaggeration. The conditions are that toxic. Your modern immune system, which has never been exposed to these pathogens and these conditions, would be overwhelmed. You would not last a week without significant luck or assistance. And if you did somehow last beyond a week, the psychological toll would be severe. You'd know that millions of people live like this permanently. You'd know that you might not escape. The despair would be crushing. You'd probably try to kill yourself within the first month. That's the reality. You would not survive. Not because you're weak, but because the conditions are simply unlivable for someone with modern sensibilities and a modern immune system. As we reach the end of this journey through Victorian London, let's reflect on what we've learned. The Victorian era is often romanticized, painted as a time of elegance and progress. And there was progress in some ways. Science advanced, technology advanced, industrialization created wealth. But that wealth was concentrated at the top. The majority of people lived in conditions of such deprivation that they would be considered unconscionable today. The system was designed to extract maximum value from human labor while providing minimum support for survival. People were broken by the system. They were used up and discarded. If they got sick, they were discarded. If they got old, they were discarded. If they couldn't work, they were discarded. This was considered normal and acceptable. The most horrible part is that this system was deliberate. It wasn't accidental. It was designed this way. The wealthy understood that poor people were suffering. They understood that conditions were brutal, and they chose to maintain these conditions because the suffering created an underclass that was desperate and willing to work for almost nothing. The threat of starvation, the threat of the workhouse, the threat of homelessness. These kept poor people compliant and desperate. The system worked exactly as designed, and the ideology that justified it was powerful. The idea that poor people deserved their suffering because they were morally inferior, because they were lazy, because they lacked virtue. This ideology is still around today. People still believe that poverty is a result of personal failing rather than systemic oppression. People still judge poor people harshly. People still resist providing aid because they believe it creates dependency. The Victorian system created structures that are still with us today. The class system is less rigid now, but it still exists. Inequality is still massive. Many poor people today are still struggling with inadequate housing, inadequate food, inadequate medical care, inadequate education. The situation is better in many ways, but some of the same underlying systems remain. The difference is that in the modern era, the situation is recognized as unjust. There are movements for change. There are social safety nets, even if they're inadequate. There are legal protections for workers, even if they're not perfect. There are public health efforts to maintain sanitation and water quality. There are medications that actually work. These improvements are the result of centuries of struggle and advocacy by working-class movements and reformers. People fought for these changes, and many of them died fighting. The Victorian era was brutal, and it took political will and activism to improve things. And even now, with all our modern conveniences, there are still people living in situations that would be considered unconscionable by modern standards. Homelessness still exists. People still die of preventable diseases. People still lack adequate medical care. The struggle for human dignity and fair treatment is not over. It continues today. So the next time you encounter a historical romance or a period drama set in Victorian London, remember what we've discussed. Remember that beneath the elegant clothing and the beautiful architecture, beneath the music and the culture that emerged from this era, there was immense suffering. Remember the millions of people who were broken by the system. Remember the children who worked in mines and factories. Remember the women who were powerless and often victimized. Remember the men who destroyed their bodies for minimal wage. Remember the people who died of diseases that we can now prevent or cure. Remember the people who starved while the wealthy lived in unimaginable luxury. Remember that the progress and culture of the era was built on the suffering of millions. This doesn't mean we should hate the era or dismiss everything that was positive about it. Progress was made, science advanced, art and literature flourished. But we should remember the cost. We should understand that progress came at the expense of human suffering, and we should use that understanding to inform our own choices in the modern era. We should work towards systems that don't require this kind of suffering. We should build a world where no one has to experience what Victorian poor people experienced. We should remember that the systems that allowed such suffering were not inevitable. They were choices made by people who had the power to make different choices, and we have the power to make different choices today. We can build systems that are more just, more equitable, more humane. It's not easy. There's inertia. There are powerful people who benefit from unjust systems. But it's possible, and understanding what happened in Victorian London can help us understand what needs to change today. So if you enjoyed this exploration of Victorian London and what survival would really have entailed, please like this video. Please subscribe for more deep dives into history that reveal the realities beneath the romance. Please comment below and let me know what surprised you most about Victorian London, or what you'd like to explore next. and please consider how the lessons from history apply to the world today. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most brutal and fascinating periods. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.